Hello and welcome to CHGO Red Stars Podcast. It's your girl, Sandra Herrera, joined by my friend, homie, and colleague, Claire Watkins. CHGO Red Stars is presented by DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook. Download the app and use promo code CHGO when you sign up. We're back. It's been a while. Shouldn't have left you. Thought a dope beat step two. But we're back. We made it somehow. I think we have. A lot of things have happened in the time where the Chicago Red Stars clinched a spot in the NWSL postseason. International window happened in between all that. That playoff game happened. A Yates report dropped. We chatted about that a little bit as well. But it's official. We come back on this episode. We're rejoining everybody live. Unfortunately, having to talk about a Chicago Red Star season coming to an end. A tough season to sort of watch, cover, and quite frankly for the players, I'm sure having to play through it. And yeah, we're here to chat all about it. Claire, glad to link up with you, see how you're doing. Pretty chill week for you, I think.
I mean, the last 2 weeks have been very busy.
Yeah.
There's been a lot going on. But I think I want to start with the game, though. I think we should talk about the game and then kind of go from there.
I think you are correct, my friend. Chicago Red Stars, in typical Chicago Red Stars player fashion, did what they did and defeated Angel City in the last home game of the regular season, earned the 6th seed and an appearance in a quarterfinal against San Diego Wave FC. And you know what? In the build-up to that game, there were some question marks around San Diego and some of their key players and who would be available or unavailable or what would that look like. And for the Red Stars, I think maybe similar storylines as well, because one of the things that we have been following throughout the season with this team is, quite frankly, it just was players who were constantly rotating on and off that availability report, right? So I don't think that energy was much different leading into this quarterfinal. I think we knew that they were going to be without a number of players, right, who have been out on maternity leave. We knew that they were going to be without two of their center backs, and Tierna Davidson and Kayla Sharples, right, out with ACLs as they have been for majority of the season. We knew they were going to be without Bianca St. George due to the extra game issued by the disciplinary committee based on her red card against Portland Thorns in the regular season there. And so we knew that there were going to be a number of people unavailable for this match. What we didn't know was maybe the minutes that some of these players would be able to sort of sustain throughout a quarter final match. Because the thing that happens when you get to the postseason is there has to be someone who advances and there has to be someone who goes home. So that already set the stage for even the possibility of going to something like penalty kicks and extra time, right? So I think for me, like in the build up to this game, I had a lot of curiosity is like in terms of like who actually would be available for San Diego. And my general feeling around it was that if somebody like Taylor Korniak for San Diego was unavailable or not 100%, and someone like Morgan Gautrat was good to go for Chicago, that Chicago would have a pretty good chance on this day. And to be frank, that first half of this game was kind of delightful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it was good. It was it's not going to shock anybody, but that game reminded me of the 2021 championship final a lot in a variety of different ways. One being that we didn't exactly know player fitness on either side going in. We didn't necessarily know what mindset the teams would be in. Obviously, there was media availability with Aaron Wright prior to the match, and it seemed, and Vanessa DiBernardo, and they were both in good spirits, and that's great. You don't always necessarily know, nor do I think players always necessarily know how those feelings manifest once you get out on a pitch. But yeah, I think they looked like they had gotten a weekend off, which was great, and it also seemed like, San Diego at the beginning of the game, they didn't push it as much, right? I think that they definitely considered themselves to be the second half team in this one, and I think they did that intentionally. And so with the limitations that San Diego was playing with, I think Chicago took a lot of space and was playing with a lot of freedom and really moving the ball well, either on the wings or in the midfield. And then you kind of had that surprising goal that Yuki Nagasato scores off of just like, I don't know if it was like the paint on the pitch or what with Snapdragon, but Kalen Sheridan makes a incredibly uncharacteristic mistake and Yuki pounces on that. And then again, like last year, right? Chicago goes up and you go, wow, I'm not sure I was expecting that, but certainly welcome, right? And then they start getting their own entrances into the box, and they start getting their own sort of team-wide play, and but still just that one goal. And I think that was that story of the first half. But yeah, I thought they played incredibly well. I mean, I think you just can't speak enough to how important Morgan Gautrat is to this midfield and is to this team. Yeah. I thought that was one of the best halves Vanessa DiBernardo has played in like 5 years. She was incredible in the first half of that game.
It's like she was waiting to be set free.
Yeah.
Higher up that pitch. It was there were I absolutely, there were moments where I was watching it where I kind of was like, reeling it in a little bit and sort of putting myself in check, and I was like, whoa. Like let's get back to those, realistic expectations here. Because it was really good to just see this team connecting the way they were connecting. Just like getting back to like good, small, smart, short, simple soccer, just connecting, stringing together their passes, small combinations, and just sort of keeping the ball, right? They were out there valuing that possession. Like that's, I think at one point during my like live reaction to the game, I had cracked a joke about that, and I was like, "Well, look at that." We've heard like somebody like Malpew, speak on that. Like they want to keep the ball. They feel better about the game when they do retain that ball. And there was also another part of me, where I like felt a little sad about it. Where I was just like, like, gosh, like, this team, like when things sort of magically line up, the way they could line up for this team, I think even going to this postseason and this starting 11 that dropped, like it's not necessarily what I think people would have considered their ideal starting 11, right? But you had players out there competing in a quarterfinal, putting together like a pretty solid game plan and executing the game plan the way they needed to execute it.
I want to real quick, I do want to highlight a comment that John is making in the chat, which I also noticed myself and I thought was indicative of something that was cool and nice to see. Was John is mentioning that Ali Wagner, who was on the call, specifically mentioned some of the passing that Chicago had done. He says Ali Wagner even mentioned at one point that CRS had something like 15 plus passes in a row. Do you guys remember listening to Ali Wagner call Chicago games in 2021 and just like
agony?
Oh, she did not like doing it. It was like
agony.
There was so much there that she clearly just did not enjoy watching.
Yeah. And you know what? She wasn't wrong.
And so it was very funny to hear that. There was a sense of like, I think she was being accurate during this game, but there was also this sense of like, finally,
Yeah. Like,
when watching
there
Chicago
it is.
play. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you have those pieces, and how are they just now like sort of being able to play like this? And watching that first goal happen, it just sort of felt like, yeah, it's like, this is what the Red Stars are capable of, like this very smart, intelligent team that can execute a game plan and kind of organize and silo you and stifle you in a way that kind of frustrates the opposition, and sort of maybe doesn't take the opposition out of their game plan, but slows down slows down the tempo for the other team for them to actually get into. So watching that first half, it was maybe one part like enthusiasm about it, and two parts like, what is it going to mean ultimately at the end of this game?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we saw what happened in the second half, right? Again, very indicative of what happened at the end of 2021. Chicago has the better of it. They really execute their game plan well. They don't give San Diego a ton of chances at the other end. Obviously, San Diego starts getting a little bit more. They start winning more corners at the end of the first half, working themselves into the game. You can't you can't beat tall. And Taylor Korniak is very tall, and she had a couple looks there at the end of the first half. And they just couldn't get the second goal, right? They just could not get the separation that they might need. And so that second half, without the turnover, that second half ends 0-0, right? Like, it just feels a little bit like, yes, this is going well. It was going well last year too, though. Like, this is the thing. And I think that the longer that second half went on, some of the structural issues of Chicago's formation became a problem, right? Like, that they started no natural defenders at wingback. Now, obviously, the whole point of having wingbacks is to make up for more attacking tendencies. There were personnel reasons why they started with two wingbacks. But then once San Diego started making their substitutes, they needed a more defensive presence on the wings, and they weren't able to recreate that, which left players in isolation in the three-back. They also only have one Aaron Wright, which meant that they wanted her in the middle, which pushed Zoe Morse out to the side. And they paid for that as well. That was a position that Morse has not really played in this season.
I was going to ask you, I said, what did you think of that sort of tactical shift by the coaching staff there? One part necessity, one part bad decision?
I wouldn't call it a bad decision. I think it's just indicative of the lack of shoring up of the back line that we've seen all season.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's just more evidence to the lack of depth and support that the team has had throughout this 2022. I think it was, I think it got pretty glaring. I think in that second half of the regular season, I think when the team sort of went on a little bit of a skid there themselves, where I'm just like, it's like, I think my reaction to it at one point was, I was just like, it's straight up like irresponsible on the organization at this point to not have additional support for these players, or a lack of depth on the bench to supplement this team moving forward. It just sort of felt, you can already sort of feel it, right? Like, if you go here, you can already sort of feel like how the potential ending for what this season was going to be. And I don't say that because it's like fun to be right. Like, I say that with like a bit of sadness about it. Like, it's not something to necessarily be like proud of, like, oh, like, look, it's tough to sort of see this team sort of, hit this brick wall at the end, where it's just like, within this game specifically, you can literally pinpoint the moment in which these players just run out of gas in this semifinal. It's just like evident. And you're just, the fact that it went to extra time, I don't know if anyone who goes here or who has watched the Chicago Red Stars for X amount of years or has covered the team for X amount of years or so on and so on can honestly say they felt confident that that game went into extra time. Is there always a chance because it's the playoffs and everything can happen? Yeah, sure. That's the hypothetical principle of the playoffs, right? Are you confident that these players who have sort of had to be, sort of grounded down over the course of a long regular season can sustain themselves through extra time? I don't know if anybody could say that they were 100% confident within that. I was almost like, well, if this even goes to penalties, like what kind of penalties are we going to see from this Chicago Red Stars team? It's just tough. It's tough to sort of see the team and the players specifically rally around each other, right, as they typically have done before in the past, and try to compete as best as they could compete in a quarterfinal, try to make a strong run in the postseason and fall short of that,
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like fine margins. I mean, I don't want to be too down on it, to be completely honest, because I do think that some of the way that it felt to watch it was informed by last year. And this year is not last year. It's not exactly the same. And I don't think it's fair to the players to act like this was a foregone conclusion because of last year. But I also think that, again, I think it just kind of, this is something that analytically we've spoken on quite a bit this season, which is just what do you do when you have gotten that go-ahead goal? How do you control the game? The fact that they were having to control a 1-goal lead, I think, was an issue because of the fitness issues that they've had over the season. When San Diego wanted to stretch, Chicago couldn't really stop the game from stretching, which is why you need probably to have scored more than 1 goal when you are controlling things. They lost on a set piece, though. I mean, I don't know. They lost on a set piece. It's not, and it was something that, I mean, Alyssa Nair said after the game, and I think that it's fair to, follow her evaluation, which is just like she probably could have gotten to that ball, right? It just was a little bit of a fluke to have it not end tied. San Diego really only scored 1 in the run of play themselves, despite, I think, getting the game that they wanted in the second half. But that's playoff soccer, right? Those are the fine margins, and I think it absolutely could have gone the other way. I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that they were going to lose this game, but I just think that this was the nature of how that worked. And the bigger issues, I think, still would have been there had they won the game, despite the quality that they showed in the first half, which is, what do you do with the wing backs? How do you handle the 3-back when you only have 3 defenders who are used to that system, right? How do you've leaned on Vanessa DiBernardo and Yuki Nagasato so extensively up to this point that despite the desire to be 90 minutes fit, I'm not sure we necessarily saw that from them, or certainly not 120 minutes fit, right? And then, you just kind of like list all the different things. And I think that those issues are off-season questions, but not necessarily like, this is why they lost that game.
Yeah. No, I feel you 100%. I don't think that's an unfair perspective, and I'm with you to a certain extent. I'm not trying to come on here and say that like this was predictable, of this team, and I'm with you in that it's unfair to, have that even be perceived that way. So I'm not in any way trying to like, portray that. I think there were moments in this game where I think it was tough to watch because you, like, talking about Vanessa DiBernardo or talking about Nagasato and sort of seeing their roles in a game like this, for me, it was just kind of like, it leaves a lot of what ifs, right? For me, it is ultimately just what I'm sort of alluding to. It's just kind of like, gosh, it's like, what if this, what if that? I'm sure people were looking at that availability report throughout the entirety of the regular season at some points, saying like, geez, like, what if there was some extra depth here at this position or that position, etc. But yeah, no, you brought up Nair in the post game, and Petroselli as well. The two of them sort of being the ones to field questions after a loss like that. And tough, quite frankly, tough position to be in because at that point in a season, A, you're eliminated, right? It's done. And B, there's always those question marks of like, well, okay, like what comes next for the Chicago Red Stars, right? And leading up in the build up to this quarterfinal, we saw that there was, a collective collaborative statement that was put out by the players themselves in regards to the full report, the Yates report dropping, and just sort of after, I think it was just like a day or so after the board of directors went ahead and made their decision to remove Whistler from his place amongst the board. And it came out that Monday leading up into the quarterfinals. So it sort of felt a little bit like, hey, this is our piece on it, and we're gonna move forward and sort of focus on this quarterfinal. And then you have the loss happen, and now their season is over. And I think that's where a lot of people are what they're sitting with now, right? Like, what comes next for the Chicago Red Stars in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's anything that's happened in the last week that changes what our analysis was last week or the week before, after making the playoffs, which is, and this is something that Nair basically straight up said after the game, which is, we've been saying this all season, which is that this group of veterans were tasked with holding a higher standard than the team around them, and by like the front office around them. No disrespect to anybody who came in post 2021, but just it was their job to be in charge, kind of. They are the ones with the institutional history. They are the ones who understand the ins and outs of this club. And they did that to the point of getting the team to a playoff game. Obviously, some bad luck with injuries, and they had other absences, that affected them as well. But I just don't think that there's anything about this loss that cheapens that or changes that story, nor do I think there's been anything over the last week. It contextualizes it, but it doesn't change that that's what this season was. And so I think this seems just about right? Like, you winning for a long time, actually, with this team, winning papered over a lot of issues. And I think players themselves obviously really wanted to make playoffs, and they wanted to go further in the playoffs. I think everybody did. But now it's the work of, like, we have to fix those issues, and we cannot let what happens on the field overshadow that in any way. And so I wonder a little bit, for the team. I think that they really wanted for each other for this to go longer, but now is the time for the club to fix some stuff. And I have to think that there is some element of certainly relief even before the playoff game after some action taken by the board. But now the fact that probably players a little bit can be like, okay, your turn now, before having to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. It's kind of just like, again, just for me, it's just even like listening to you talk right now, and just sort of like, it's frustrating, right, about that. And just sort of like the players being tasked with the responsibility of, presenting the or painting the picture of success at a club, right? Despite the dysfunction and lack of resources behind it, quite frankly. And like listening to, Alyssa Nair, speak to that a little bit in the post game, sort of, saying how there are some things that were initially on background sort of coming to the forefront now in terms of players navigating their pro careers with this club. Um, and kind of alluding to that, like what you said, it's just going to have to be about taking the off season as it comes. That's going to continue to be, working on themselves as individuals, as professional athletes, continued conversations amongst each other as teammates and players, potential conversations with people in positions of power, whether it be board members or other investors as well. And I think it's too early to determine, any one path or any one direct answer or solution to what we know now are, quite frankly, many problems with this franchise.
Yeah, and I think like that's the next step.
I gotta say, in light of if you're a Red Stars fan, if you're an NWSL fan, maybe you're looking at this like, well, I'm done. I'm done with soccer season. I'm not going to, humor myself with that. I'll see you next year. There's all kinds of sports that are still going on. Maybe you're someone who like dives into a different sport to sort of wash away the memory of the other sport that you typically tune into. But right now in October, it's baseball season, right? So that means it's October baseball. And you can go ahead and download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. And now you can use promo code CHGO. You can bet $5 to win $200 in free bets if your team wins, only at DraftKings Sportsbook with promo code CHGO. There are minimum age and eligibility restrictions that apply. You should see the notes for details. Yeah, go ahead and download, utilize DraftKings. If you want to take yourself away, maybe place a bet and make yourself a winner, and maybe bring yourself some a little bit of joy. Like, who doesn't like being a winner, even if it is placing a bet on something? But no, I think bringing all that stuff up for a reason, bringing up what Alyssa Nair sort of shared in the post game, and bringing up the concept of what comes next, because after this game for the Red Stars, Claire, you had a really good piece that dropped with Defector Media, something that you've been working on for an incredibly long time. I'm just sort of speaking to this as like really just like a friend of Claire's now. I know how hard my friend has worked to ensure that good reporting was done around this story, and it dropped recently this week. So if you have not had a chance to go and read her reporting in Defector, you should go and do that. But it has definitely shed some light in areas for this franchise in which they have struggled for some time.
Yeah, honestly, Sandra, I'm interested in your takeaways more than mine. I know what I'll just put it out there, right? I know what I've got. What are your takeaways having read that and having read Meg's piece as well?
Well, dude, like, you and I, there were check-ins, right? We'll just say that. Like, for you and I as friends, there were check-ins, mental health check-ins, and sort of just like making sure that you were okay in that time, or how you were feeling about it. But sort of reading it all and sort of this sort of combo, like 1-2 punch, right? That you had Meg and her reporting in The Athletic, and you had finally your long form piece in Defector come out. I want to say, like, initially it just sort of felt like, well, it just sort of gives perspective, I think, for people who aren't or weren't aware of some of these things. There's a lot that's been put out there recently, whether people are getting information from the Yates report around this franchise for the first time, or folks who were reading your reporting with Defector. And I think it shed an important light on areas that are outside of just the areas that we saw highlighted within a Yates report, which are very serious issues, systemic issues where you have people in positions of power protecting abusers, right? And enabling that abuse to continue. But then you've also got areas within NWSL that have also been stifled. And it sheds light on the areas in which I don't think people are necessarily thinking about right away. The issue of housing and how that comes into play for professional athletes here in the NWSL. That the Red Stars were a franchise that were utilizing host families all the way up until 2019. And that they were ran by an owner who, quite frankly, would have continued to allow that to happen had mandates for housing not been put into place, right? But then even with a housing mandate in place, that the living situations for some players were still not up to par. So I think it's important reporting. I think it's valuable reporting. I had similar feelings about it when, it sort of took me back to when we saw a lot of reporting around Sky Blue. Quite frankly, it took me back to that a little bit, and perhaps it's weighted a bit different. I think for people because it resonates closer to home. A and B, it's weighted heavier because of the last couple of weeks, right? With everything dropping within that Yates report. So I think it highlights again the issues with housing, the issues and struggles within for staff and front office staff. It highlights just how much of it does in fact come from the top. And I think that is a very important aspect that people should not lose sight of moving forward.
Yeah, I think systemic change is hard. I think everybody knows that. I think systemic change is not always linear. There's that issue as well. There's a lot of people kind of running the team now. Running a team by committee is not always the easiest either. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, like the piece was published about 48 hours ago and I don't have necessarily a ton to say that's not in there.
Yeah.
I did go on Meg Linehan's show and spoke to her about some of the larger systemic things and like next steps, because I think her reporting is an indicator of the situation that the team is in right now, which is that when you do have that many voices in a room trying to run a team, you're going to have people that I think want more present, active, aggressive change, and you're going to have people who are a little bit more status quo minded. I would hope that the takeaway from my work in conjunction with that is that status quo is not going to work. And that does get into the free agency question of the way the club has been run thus far has left so thin of margins for even like a holding pattern that swift aggressive action is necessary, I think, to not do further damage, I guess is the way to put it.
I mean, yeah, and I guess, oh my God, I guess we'll just see. I'm not even trying to simplify it or anything like that, but I think that's the other part of it too. It's like we've heard that from comms that they want to try to pursue some things in a timely manner. But what is that going to look like? What does that timeline actually look and feel like? And the waiting, I think, quite frankly, in between all of it is the hardest part, right? The unknowns in between that until you do actually get solutions around it, especially like as this team essentially enters an off season, with not just a target on its back, but a very public target on its back. I think it's just sort of stemming off of, you know, last season's off season. It was evident that there were struggles for this team in retaining players who no longer wanted to be here, right? And B, attracting or signing any type of new talent, right? That's an issue for this team. I don't think that's an unfair thing to say on a Red Stars fan podcast. It's both the revelation and confirmation that this franchise as it currently exists might not necessarily be a franchise in which new acquisitions are eager to make the jump to, right? Whereas maybe the narrative around this team before in the past was a little bit different. Where it was a team, hey, we're a playoff bound team, this located in a cool city, come beyond the Red Stars, right? That isn't enough, quite frankly, anymore moving forward, to this year. So where it's like we sort of saw that and the feelings of that in that 2021 off season, I think we're going to continue to see that in 2022 into 2023. But I think the feeling is a little bit different in that it just sort of confirms things uh, for people. I mean, we hear from players all the time. They talk to each other, and they are the first point of contact for one another about, clubs and interest from clubs and what it's like to play amongst clubs. And I can't imagine that the Red Stars franchise's reputation is one that's a good one right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately what I want, and I'm sure fans want, and players and staff wants, is for here it just ultimately, and I don't think that this is a controversial statement, is when the board ultimately, or whatever happens with a potential sale, when someone comes forward from within the club and says things are better, you want it to be true. And I think that a difficult thing, and I am not placing this only on Chicago, we have seen this other places too, is there's this desire to be perceived as progressing without wanting to do the work to actually do so. And I don't fully understand where that impulse comes from. Just actually do better, and then you can announce the good things that you're doing. I have no reason at this moment to believe that that is not what the board would like to do. But obviously Meg's reporting puts a little bit of doubt again on if you have people with impulses that lean towards status quo, those are difficult impulses to overcome. And I know people are worried about the nuclear scenario, right? Which would be folding or relocation. Fans have said on social media that is actually some of the messaging that they got from the club in the last offseason was playing on those fears. And it's now up to the board for that not to happen, right? And we say this all the time. The punishment for speaking out should not be losing your job. And I mean that for like the players too, or having to move from a place you don't want to move from, a place you've put down roots, the city in which you've lived for years. That is not the goal here. And that is also, I think, part of that overhanging punishment that has sat on the league for a decade. And so now it's just a huge responsibility on the board to just do better and then announce the good things that you're doing. And that's the real work, like the real work. And I'm not going to lie, I think it's going to be expensive. And putting your money where your mouth is, I think, is also really, really hard to do, as we've seen.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think a little bit of just what we've seen in recent years, right?
Yeah,
When
there we
it
go. Sorry, real quick. I do just want to say John, who is in local 134, said that is what supporters were told, was that if
confirmed.
yeah, confirmed. Thank you, John. Hey, you're reporting
Confirmed.
too.
Thank
Yep.
you, John, for
Yeah.
confirming
Yep.
that the
Yep.
supporters group was also traumatized
Yeah.
by ownership. So there you go. That's a bit of more confirmation for folks. Yeah, that's terrible. I hate that, quite frankly. I'm trying to be a little bit more composed about it because I'm a little bit enraged by seeing that. That's terrible. That is what abusers do. You know, prey on fears, and that's terrible. I am so sorry that supporters of a supporters group, people who have invested not just money, a lot of it, right? And B, a ton of their personal time, were told that and preyed upon that. That's terrible. Um, so I'm with you in that, Claire. I think just sort of thinking a bit to present day, just looking at the landscape of NWSL and like what ownership looks like now. Um, we've seen we've seen a couple of California teams enter the fold. Um, Angel City sort of presenting a new look type of ownership model, right? And we saw Whistler and company sort of copycat and mimic that and try to say like, okay, well, we can do this too. Um, but remembering when this new wave of investorship, came into play, like a part of what was, celebrated about it was that so many of these folks had uh, ties to the city, ties to Chicago, obviously the team as a franchise. Um, and just sort of thinking about new waves of investors in other areas, whether it was like a Sky Blue to Gotham, rebrand, or obviously some of the interfighting that we saw out of the Spirit franchise last year, where now Michelle Y. King is primary owner of that franchise. It ultimately came down to that, right? Just to sort of pluck out like an example, this concept of like, well, what will happen to the team if owner A, goes elsewhere, right? Or disappears. And we see that there was somebody like King who was interested in not just having the franchise, but keeping it in DC. So, I think there's going to be some challenges there for sure. But talking about folks, putting money where their mouth is or towards actionable things, like what does a future ownership group for this team looks like, and is the priority of that new look ownership group and or new look board of directors, is their priority to ensure that there is a franchise in the biggest city in the Midwest? I'm curious to sort of see what comes along with that, and how that looks like. I would imagine that there's always the possibility in which there may be folks who want to disinvest from this franchise. There's a possibility of that too. I don't know if we'll see that, but it is something that I think about, that weighs on my mind. What does that look like moving forward? Or but again, like what is the solution for that? I personally don't have an immediate one myself, um, and I'm not someone in the room to make those decisions. Um, but knowing that that was something that was placed out there in some capacity, like the only way this team can exist is if this one person is involved is dangerous. It was always a dangerous narrative, and it's still a dangerous narrative now.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and so I just I do wonder, as the league itself as a whole kind of continues to enter new territories, right? Like we're entering an off season for many teams. There's only 4 teams left in the postseason right now. There's a semifinal that's going to take place on October 23rd on Sunday. But for the other 8 teams, you know, off season has begun. Like that is in full play. Some of the other bit of news that dropped was, you know, free agency is confirmed. You know, the arbitration period that took place for a certain amount of players, about whether or not they were actually eligible. News, they are. Whether or not they'll be able to negotiate contracts. So we're sort of in a bit of a free agency period for all of those 8 teams who are not involved in the postseason anymore, and that naturally includes the Red Stars, and there are some pretty notable names on the list.
It was not lost on me that and again, you know, this is not something I have any inside information on, just sort of my impressions from the outside. But it was not lost on me that there were a number of veteran Red Stars whose status was in dispute in this particular arbitration, meaning that from the league's perspective, I don't even know whose perspective. Like, Jessica Berman supported it. I don't exactly know who it was who was arguing otherwise, to be completely honest. But from someone's perspective, requiring legal arbitration, a number of those players didn't get to be free agents if the team decided to pick up their team side option. And just, it wasn't lost on me that there were a number of longtime Red Stars who were caught in the middle of that arbitration.
Yeah, I don't unfortunately have the list in front of me right now, but I believe
it's definitely Danny Colaprico. I'm pretty sure
I was going to say I believe the Red Stars were the team with the most.
Yeah.
On top of that,
yeah,
I think they had like 4 or 5 players.
Yeah,
compared to like a couple of players for each franchise, and I had the same feeling, Claire. I was like, that is suspiciously many Chicago Red Stars players,
right,
compared to some of the others, and more again, veteran players, established players of the league and of this franchise specifically. Yeah, no, I think it's something to keep an eye on, for sure. I think adjacent to this franchise figuring out its next steps in terms of what ownership looks like, in terms of what investment looks like, adjacent to that is also negotiating with some of these players, talking about putting your money where your mouth is. Are you going to be putting it in the one place that absolutely necessitates that type of investment? The players, right? The players, and some of these players being players who have been with this franchise since they've been drafted, throughout the Red Stars' existence, quite frankly. So we'll see. It's something, like I said, to keep an eye on, something that we'll have to pay attention to as the off season progresses. But I think to close out, like if you want to get personal with the folks here on the live, just overall thoughts of the season. I'm tired. I'll just say it. It's been a long year covering this team. I'm grateful to the players for the time that they give us, and the same would go for staff as well of the team. Grateful to you, Claire, right, to be local in the same city with you and checking in with each other whenever we can. And just grateful to anyone who's ever listened to us on any podcast and followed or read any type of work or any types of takes, right? So I hope folks can take some time in the off season to find a little bit of joy for themselves.
Here's my one final thought here, and I want to be very like measured and fair in this. But so Sandra works for CBS, right? You work for CBS and you cover the whole league, and not just the league. You also cover the U.S. Women's National Team. You guys have some WSL games. You guys have potentially some Champions League games. You guys have a lot going on. I just signed on full time with Just Women's Sports, which is very exciting, to take point on their women's soccer coverage, as well as doing their newsletter, which that's like all of women's sports. That's everything, 3 days a week. Sign up if you haven't. It's good. And I just want to say that with this team, and this is a whole extra conversation, but this goes back to just sort of thanking CHGO for giving us this platform this season, is part of the story of this team and others is an abdication of responsibility from the local media infrastructure in a city. And, you know, again, it's not worth it to get in it too deeply. But Sandra and I have had the exact same conversations that other people have had about other things within the club, which is, if we don't do this, and this is essentially like in our free time, this is an additional thing that we do. If we don't do this, nobody else will. And that is not sustainable either. So I'm, yes, exceptionally grateful for every player that gave us their time and their energy. Grateful to the coaching staff for speaking with us. Grateful to Chicago Red Stars Communications for making players available when we asked for them. But I'm not going to pretend that I'm like walking away from this, like patting myself on the back either, or feeling like even the piece that I reported this week was some great triumph, because it's indicative of something that, again, there is so much work to do and there is so much investment needed. And it's not just from the club side. And so I have very complicated feelings about this year. I have very complicated feelings about the last couple of years. And we'll have to process those. And kind of Sandra and I will probably have many, many conversations over the off season. And hopefully things are better next year across the board.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, buddy. Yeah, everybody protect your peace. We appreciate you joining us live today, as always. And if you have the time and if you are able to make the space, please support soccer in Chicago when and if you can. Okay. Make sure that you continue to support CHGO as well. Again, we are appreciative for the platform here as well, to even be able to sort of talk about all this kind of stuff. And if you've enjoyed it, make sure you sign up for a CHGO membership. You get access to podcasts, live shows on every single Chicago team every single day. You get access to written content, merchandise, a free shirt when you become a member, and you get access to the members only Discord, the CHGO Lounge. But that's it. That's a wrap for Claire and I on the 2022 Chicago Red Stars season. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.
Oh my God, sorry, my mouse was stuck.
No, you're good. I was like, we're holding and we're holding and we're holding.
I'm going to smile. No, you're fine, dude. Thanks for letting us do this remote.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. It was
for sure.
For me on this end.